Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. And thanks for coming up.
Hey, how are you doing?
Doing well. Do you feel free to share what you experienced in Fort Bragg?
So, years and years ago, I was in the Army, and a group of me and I'd say like 3-4 other soldiers took off from our base camp, which is like a city, our barracks where we lived, to go out further into the woods to go and camp and fish. And I always felt like something was watching me every time we would go out, and I just assumed that it could be other soldiers, potentially in the area, but I always knew that I wasn't alone. So over the course of a couple of months, we would go out and we would bass fish. It was a great place to catch largemouth bass. And one afternoon, it was just about dark. I happened to look out over the lake, and I seen what I can only describe to be as a very large, hairy creature, between 300 and 400 pounds, 7 foot tall, just gigantic, standing there looking at me from across the lake. And I asked my battle buddy, I'm like, hey girl, I'm like, look, do you see what I see? Like, what was that at 7 o'clock? And she looked out, she seen it too. The guys that were with us, they thought that we were just a couple of scared girls out in the dark in the woods. But my friend, she seen what I seen, and yeah, that's my story.
Do you remember any details of the face that you saw, or was it too far away to see that?
It was too far away to really make out a face. I just remember it being like a reddish brown, hairy man, just like humongous. Like I said, like way bigger than us, like just gigantic and covered in hair, and it just stood there and was literally watching us.
Being at that area, would you hear any other people talk about having similar sightings in the same area?
Yeah, I've heard a couple of guys on, podcasts say that when they were also stationed at Fort Bragg, that they seen creatures out there. Yeah, I've heard of others that have seen the same thing.
Did that sighting affect you in any way?
Yeah, I used to be an avid hiker. Hiked all over the Appalachian Trail. I grew up in South Georgia in the middle of nowhere in the woods myself, and I don't want to be alone, Like before, I would just walk to my mom's house from a couple of miles away, but I wouldn't do that again because, yeah, we're not alone here. They're definitely observers of us.
Is that a thing where when you got back to the base area, did you end up telling a lot of people, or did you try to keep it quiet?
They made fun of me. They didn't believe me. They said, we were probably out drinking, but I know what I seen. I looked right at it. You get all the hairs on the back of your neck standing up, and you're not alone. That's them.
So you could feel that before you focused in on, oh, there's something actually over there.
Oh, yeah.
thank you for coming up and for sharing that. That is, that you're my first person to talk to from that area. So I appreciate you coming up.
You're welcome. It's good to get my story out there. Hopefully it sparks something with somebody else that's seen something in that area.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good night.
Chantel, how's it going?
Great.
Good. Thanks for coming up. Feel free to share what you saw down in Florida.
Okay. I used to live in Hillsborough County, Florida, and I used to go walking in these woods that grew along the Alafaya River down there. And me and a friend of mine, we went in there, and the cool thing about those woods, there's Indian burial mounds back there. I mean, it's a really cool place to go. A lot of people don't know about it, but while we were back there one day, we kept getting the sense that something was in there with us. We couldn't see it. We did get a whiff of something awful. I guess the closest thing I could think of would be almost like rotting flesh and wet dog. It's the closest thing that I could think of. I mean, it was awful, and we just kind of said, well, maybe I mean, these woods, they're pretty deep, so maybe there's a dead animal close by. I mean, that's the only thing we could think of. But we stayed back there probably for a couple of hours, and it started getting darker outside, getting closer to twilight. And, we were teenagers at the time, so I needed to get home. And as we were walking out, I happened out in the corner of my eye to see what I thought was an uprooted tree that had like Spanish moss hanging from it. But then I stopped and wait, I know this trail like the back of my hand. I do not remember a tree ever being there. So I happened to look, and I stopped, because what I thought was Spanish moss was something that was kind of hunched down in the palmettos, and it was just staring at me. It's as still as a statue. Just being hunched over, I would say, was about maybe 6 to 7 foot tall. If I'm going to go ahead and say Sasquatch, if he would have stood up at his fullest height, he probably would have been a good 8 to 9, maybe 10 foot tall. And he was the color of Spanish moss. I don't know if maybe depending on the area where they live, they could blend in better with the surrounding area, because the farther south in Florida you go, the more Spanish moss there is. But for something being as big as it was, for it to stand as still as could be and not even make a noise, I think I'm going to say the most noise we heard whenever we kept feeling like something was back there would, if you could think maybe a deer or like a rabbit or something kind of walking, because we didn't see anything and we could smell something. But whenever I saw this, I just stood there, and my friend, he kept walking ahead of me, still talking, thinking, didn't even realize I stopped. And I told him very calmly, I said, I need you to stop and turn around. And I want you to look where I'm looking. I want you to tell me what you see, because I need to know I'm not seeing things. And when he kind of looked, he had a look on his face like, what are you talking about? And he looked, followed where I was looking. And when he finally saw what I saw, his face went ghost white. We stood there probably for a good 2 minutes, just kind of having a stare down with this. Going by the size, I'm going to say it was a him, because it was huge. His shoulders were massive. His arms were gigantic. He could clearly, if he wanted to, pull a tree straight out of the ground, no problems whatsoever. But I didn't get the feeling that it was wanting to harm either one of us. I don't know if it was curious. I don't know if it was, just trying to check us out, seeing if we were a threat to it. But finally, he found his words and he asked me, like, very quiet. He's like, well, what do we do? And I told him, I was just like, well, let's just keep walking. Just act like everything's normal and just leave it at that. Because, I mean, with the size of this thing, I'm not wanting to, excuse my language, I'm not wanting to piss it off. And, he just kind of agrees with me. So we start walking, but the first chance we got, once we felt like we were safe enough to do so and got closer to the exit of the woods, we ran. And I told my dad about it whenever I got home, and he was telling me that he used to go back there a lot when he was younger too, and he used to find these trees, good-sized trees. I'm going to say maybe about, I don't know, a good 6 to 8 inches wide, and there'd be about, a cluster of them that would be twisted together. And it wasn't anything that was naturally grown that way, because whenever he found them, he said it looks like something just grabbed a bunch of trees, twisted them all together. The bark was split, and he said he doesn't know if it was, because whenever he went back there, he would smell something like what I explained, kind of like mixture of a skunk or a, which, in Florida, I guess you've heard about the, legend of the skunk ape down there. The same thing as Sasquatch, but from what I saw, it didn't really remind me anything about sightings of a skunk ape. My dad, he saw a few of them while down there. He said the one that he saw, one of the ones he saw was more of a red, but it was more the northern parts of Florida. Because he lived in Tampa when Tampa still had a good bit of swamp left there. And he said the ones he saw were also silver, like Spanish moss. And he said, he even mentioned that one of them came walking up on him and his friends. And he said, he turned around because he heard something walking, but he's expecting to see something small. He just looks up. And him and his friends, they panicked and ran. And you're not expecting something that big to be so quiet. But that's the best story I have of the sighting. I was 14 when it happened. I'm 33 now. And okay. I live in Alabama now, and Alabama has, a lot of stories too. I've heard things that I couldn't explain that sound like could very possibly, I don't really know what they sound like. I've never personally heard one, but the things I've heard, I don't know if maybe it's one of them, because I live more up in the mountains here. So, but it was a really amazing experience. Granted, it scared me at the time. Like I said, I was 14. I didn't know what to think. But after, the older I got, the more I realized, there's so many people out there that would love to see something like that. And actually getting the chance to see him and everything, and not feeling like he wanted to do any harm, it was amazing. And I wish I could see one again, but I think it's up to them whether or not, if they want you to see him or not, because I could have just kept walking past like it was nothing. But just that whole day, me and him were just like, I feel like something's in here with us, but we didn't see anything. We just kept smelling something. And then when we were leaving, that's when we saw him, But it was an awesome experience, and I'm hoping I get to experience something like that again one day. And hopefully it's something that, because I've heard of some people seeing them and them being kind of aggressive, but I've also heard where, they might be aggressive, but I don't think they've ever harmed anybody. I don't believe that. I've always wanted to tell my story. I've told a few people before, but whenever I came up on your live, I'm like, oh yeah, I want to share this. So
I'm glad
But
you came
yeah,
up and shared it. Are you by Talladega or no? Yeah, Talladega or Bankhead in Alabama.
I'm close to Talladega, and I have been to Bankhead, Alabama. And Bankhead
Okay.
National Forest is one of my most favorite places to go. But yeah, I'm close to Talladega.
Okay, I would say both of those areas are your best bets for trying to have an interaction in Alabama from, just people I've talked to that are in that area, especially the
Yeah.
southern part of Talladega National Forest.
Well, I'm very close to Mount Cheeha. I'm only about 30 minutes away from Mount Cheeha.
Oh, there you
So,
go. Yeah.
like I
You
said,
know
I've
about that
heard
mountain.
I've heard things, and I've seen trees moving, huge trees moving. But I mean, it was like, you know what? I'm gonna see that from a distance. I thought, investigate. 'Cause that's a huge tree, and whatever is moving it, I don't think I'm gonna, you know. There's been, I mean, there's a lot of things that people have witnessing in these mountains and everything that, like the Alabama White thing. That's something that people have
Yep.
witnessing. I mean, even in the area I live in, people have talked about seeing something that's very tall and white and, is there 1 second and gone. And it gives you like a feeling of like, it scares people. But from what I've heard, it's just there. They see it and then it's like gone. So,
Wow.
yeah, very, very strange cryptid stories about that one. So, but neat all the same. I love that sort of stuff.
If you keep going out to that area, Mount Cheeha and all that stuff, you're gonna eventually have some stuff happen. The stories I hear down there are wild. So, always feel free to, if you ever want to reach out, my email's up there if you want to make a note of it. If you ever have anything else happen in the future, would love to hear from you. Cool.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I want to go do more exploring, especially at Bankhead and Mount Cheeha, but I want to go to where there's not as many tourists, because
Okay.
the farther, I
get
don't
it.
want to be out in the middle of absolute nowhere, but you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So no, if I ever have anybody tell me about sightings they've had or experiences they've had, whether it's the Alabama White thing or Sasquatch, I will definitely email you.
Awesome. Good stuff. Well, thanks for coming up, Chantel. Ethan, thanks for coming up.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
What brings you up, man?
Yeah, it's legitimately my favorite story to tell. And I just want to preface this. I'm not what I guess you would call, I'm not a believer, okay? So before we get into all that, and that matters because I want to tell the story the same way I tell it to my friends or my family, like the same way I always tell the story.
Sure.
So at some point you'll hear me mention that during the story that I'm not a believer, and that's why I want to get it out of the way right now. And I grew up in Appalachia, a lot of folklore, a lot of weird stuff that we believe in, and that your mama and everybody raised you with. And so to say I'm not a believer, you can kind of laugh it off because I believe in a lot of other silly, weird things. To the outside people who aren't part of that, they would see a lot of the weird things that I am creeped out by, or just have a general hesitation to do things. To say that I don't believe in Bigfoot or Sasquatch is just silly when you stack it up with all the other things that I actually believe. Anyway, I'm going to tell it the exact same way I always tell it. I was living in Florida in Orlando area for a few years and met a girl. We began dating. She wanted to go into travel nursing and asked me to come with her. I left my corporate job to go travel with her for a bit. Started off on the West Coast and Oregon. I'm a big camper. I'm an outdoorsman my entire life. I've been hunting and camping and everything my entire life. And I like to say that no, I haven't seen every creature out in the forest, but I can ballpark it if I hear it. That's a bird, or that's a bleat from an elk or deer or something. I'm a very experienced outdoorsman. So when the travel nursing thing that my ex was doing at the time took us to Washington State. I think it was 2016. She had a assignment there at the Washington University, and I'm just going along with the flow. We were only going to do this for a given amount of time, so I'm just finding little odds and ends jobs as we go, because typically an assignment is only 3 months, and she can choose to extend it or whatever. Any nurses in here, any travel nurses, you guys know the deal. But she had a trip planned with a mutual friend of ours out to Amsterdam and Iceland for about a week. So I took it upon myself that I'm going to go camping around Mount Rainier. At the time, that was my big plan. And it was the first time that I'd ever tried my hand at dispersed camping. You know, you see the Instagram posts of these beautiful pictures of these outdoorsy people that are camping out in the middle of nowhere, and you wonder where they got these pictures from. And yeah, you can pay a $52 fee to the national parks and kind of do that thing, but like these people are always camping out in wherever. Turns out that is considered dispersed camping, and in a national forest, you're free to camp wherever you like. Typically, your national forests are right outside of a national park. And for those of you who are watching, we got 172 people in here who aren't really aware of like the Bigfoot Sasquatch thing. The Sasquatch that you think of, if you're not part of a region that has their own skunk ape, or like Chantel was in here recently, the Deep South has the skunk ape. Different parts of the world all over have various accounts of these Bigfoot-like creatures, but the one that you think of that your head goes to is Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest. That's where most of us have our idea of Sasquatch and Bigfoot. And I feel like that lends more credence to my story, because now I'm in the Pacific Northwest in Washington State, and I'm out in the middle of nowhere. I wanted to try the dispersed camping for the first time. I'm doing my research. I call the state park or the national park office and speak to a ranger, and just want to make sure I'm not doing anything. I'm not going to be hassled by where I try to go post up in camp. And they were very helpful. Gave me a recommendation for the scenic byway leading up to Mount Rainier National Park that takes you through Mount Rainier National Forest. And she basically told me that, yeah, basically anywhere off that road is the national forest, and you can pick any kind of spot. You'll find spots that are already pre-camped and have overgrown fire pits that people have used over the years, blah, blah, blah. And it's just me and my dog. I got all my ducks in a row, and I set off this day to go find a place. I knew I was going to just hunt down a camping spot, so I left early in the morning and made great time. Got down there, beautiful day. You think of Washington and Oregon and all that being cloudy and gloomy and all that. No, this was a beautifully lit day, no clouds. And I got into the area right around noon. So plenty of daylight left, plenty of time on my hands. I'm just going down the byway and just kind of investigating those little overgrown paths that you see off the road. And by the way, for anybody who's interested, 9 times out of 10, you see those little turnouts off of a scenic byway or a old route that looks like somebody used to go into the woods right there. Poke your head through the tree line right there, and 9 times out of 10, you actually find that people do camp out there, and there's an overgrown fire pit that has been used over the years. Anyway, I found this little turn off a dirt road that my goal was, at the time, I'd really gotten into some photography, and I was having a blast with my Nikon, and I wanted to try my hand at astrophotography, nighttime star photography, get a great picture of the star. These are exposure shots where the lens stays open for 20 seconds a time, and it can take in a lot more light than what you can see, and therefore these great star pictures show up in the photo. And this is my very first time that I was going to try this out in the middle of nowhere by myself, and I was really excited for it. And I wanted to find a spot that has a direct line of sight to Mount Rainier itself at night with the stars and everything above it. I picked a terrible day because it was a full moon. The sky was too whitewashed and I didn't have all the stars. Anyway, found this turnoff, this dirt road that kind of ran off the scenic byway there. And it was so narrow, and so I had no business going up this road because it was overgrown and narrow. There's nowhere to turn around. I had to go up at least 3 miles, let's say, before I could even find a turnaround point with enough room for me to like do a little 3-point turnaround to even get back down the mountain. But came to a beautiful clearing where I am at least 2,000 feet up from where I was down on the main road on the scenic byway, and had a perfect, beautiful line of sight to Mount Rainier. With, I think I was in between two other little small, not mountains, but I guess you call them hills, or out here they'd be mountains out here in Appalachia. Anyways, beautiful spot, perfect vision, perfect line of sight. I'm like, this will be great. Come nightfall, I'll be able to get great shots of this. And there was just enough room for me to turn off and get off the actual path. And there was an overgrown fire pit there that had been used at some point in the last 15 years or sometime. But the bugs were insane. And by this time, it's not 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's broad daylight. There's no fear of anything at this point, right? I know what I'm doing, but you got to be cautious anyway, and to an extent, and realize that you're isolated and with no protection. I'm not traveling with any firearms or anything, and I forgot my machete that I would use to cut down brush and stuff just to make any clearing whenever I would go camping. So I have nothing, and my dog is not much protection at all at the time. But the bugs were terrible, so the second I get pulled off and get a feel for it, I'm like, let me build a fire real fast just to help keep the bugs away, throw up the tent, keep the dog out of it, and got all that done within about 15 minutes. And again, I'm an outdoorsman. I've been hunting and camping my entire life. I don't know every creature out there in the wilderness, but I can ballpark it if I hear something. If it makes a call, if it makes a noise, I'm a 99% success rate type deal, right? Now in my head, I know Sasquatch is not real. This is why I mentioned this in the beginning, that I'm not a believer, but I'm telling it the same way I tell it to everybody. I know Sasquatch isn't real. That's not a concern of mine when I'm assessing my danger level out in the middle of nowhere. I'm pretty confident, I'm pretty self-sufficient. I can do the thing, but broad daylight, 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a beautiful day, fire going, beautiful view of Mount Rainier right in front of me, elevated position up on some whatever mountain I was on off the scenic byway, and somebody of the 100 and 200 people we got in here, maybe somebody's from that area, you know what road I'm talking about. That's the main byway going up to Mount Rainier National Park. All of a sudden, I hear what I can only describe as a blood-curdling turkey scream. You put a gun to my head, and I there's no way I could tell you what this creature was. This has baffled me for, I guess that was almost 10 years ago now. It's baffled me to this day. It sent chills down my spine immediately. And on top of that, I looked down at my dog, this little pit bull terrier mix, 45-pound It looks like a giant Jack Russell. She was a 45-pound Jack Russell pit bull mix. She's frozen solid, and the hairs on the back of her neck are just straight up. Straight up. Now, because of our elevated position and being out there in a mountainous area, it's really difficult to gauge the distance. You know, if something's not within 50 feet of you, there's a lot of echo, there's a lot of sound travel. But I can confidently say whatever it was within 200 yards, easily. That's being cautious about it. But I was dumbfounded. Again, this isn't like a spooky nighttime scenario or anything. This is broad daylight. I did have the thought before this happened, maybe moments before at least, or maybe on the way up, because I can only go like 5-10 miles an hour max on the way up this overgrown path that I had no business going up in the first place. There just wasn't anywhere to turn around before I found this wonderful place to stop and set up camp and hopefully get some great night shots of the sky at the time. But broad daylight, 2 o'clock, and I look down and see the dog, hair on the back of her neck standing up, and maybe 5 seconds had passed where I'm just kind of processing what I just heard and what I just seen. That's all the time it took. I immediately didn't even take apart my tent. I kind of like grabbed it up and just like bunched it all together and threw it back into the back of our Subaru, grabbed the dog, threw the dog in the back. I'm like, I don't know what that was, but I'm not sticking around to find out. And hauled at, did a really sketchy 3-point turnaround to get back down this path that I'd come up. You can't go that fast on that. I'm only doing 5 to 10 miles an hour. So the entire time, which took me a good 20 minutes or so to get back down, because again, we're about 3 miles up. There was nowhere to turn around. I just kept going up because there was nowhere to turn around. So I'm doing this slow pace thing down the mountain. The whole time I'm looking around, gripping the white knuckling the steering wheel, like looking out of every window and looking in the rear view, like is something following, is something going to come after me? I was shook to my core from this. When I keep mentioning the fact that I'm an outdoorsman, that I'm a hunter and a camp, I camp. I go camping in the most remote places that I can find at least 15 times a year. And I'm very comfortable being outside, being outdoors, and being in these situations. This shook me to my core. This unidentifiable definitely came from an animal. 100% came from some kind of creature. I did not see this thing. I didn't have Bigfoot in front of me or anything like that. But the fact that I'm in the Pacific North, I'm where the origin story of the Bigfoot that we recognize came from. And I couldn't dismiss it. I couldn't just shake that off and say that's not a real thing. I mean, there's a reason that for millennia, many cultures around the world have very similar stories of a Bigfoot type creature. And that is my time experiencing Bigfoot. That's how I explain it to everybody. That's how I tell the story, is that's when I ran into Bigfoot.
That's awesome. I mean, you said yourself you're not a believer, but it lines up with so many accounts I've heard over the years. That's an incredible account. Thank you for sharing.
I appreciate that. That feels validating because, I mean, again, even when I tell the story, and I love telling the story because I tell it the exact same way every time, but it still baffles me to this day. And I couldn't pretend like I could even roundabout what that thing was. I call it a blood-curdling turkey scream because it was so loud and ear-jarring, and it seemed directed. I don't know if it was directed at me, but it seemed directed, if that makes sense.
Sure.
maybe it was directed towards me, maybe it was directed to something else, but it felt like it was a call to something, not just a random call or bleat or anything like elk and deer and such do. This was weird. This was a thing in all the Bigfoot documentaries and stuff which by the way I love. I'm a big folklore person. I love all that. Nice. It didn't line up with any of the, let's call it out what it is. A lot of those shows and everything, they're just goofy. They're get the viewers, get the paycheck real quick.
Yep.
And they put these weird calls that some farmer Joe from next door put together, and they feel like that's going to draw out Bigfoot from their cornfield or their soy field from wherever they got their tree stand set up. Wasn't quite anything like that, but it was absolutely abnormal. It was not a thing that you would recognize on any level, any outdoors, any nature lover. If I can't do it, if I can't even ballpark it, if I can't round it up, the average person certainly is not going to have any kind of valid explanation for this. It was absolutely jarring.
Ooh, that's a wild account, and thank you for sharing it, Ethan. I appreciate you coming up.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I love telling it.
Thank you, Ethan, for hanging out. Man, this has been a wild night. So Kara's got a great comment here. I was camping on Mount St. Helens, flat tire, 3 big animals surround, roaring, closing in. I ran away. I'm going to reach out to Kara to see if she is able to come up. Got some good stuff going on, but thank you, man. All right, we got a guest request. Let's see what happens here. The Jimbo Kong.
Hello.
Hey, Jimbo, how's it going?
I'm doing pretty good, and you? Happy Thanksgiving, y'all.
Happy Thanksgiving. What brings you up?
Okay, so there a couple years ago, I went to Mexico to visit, my stepdad's family. And by the way, this was in one state called Michoacán, Mexico. So we're in the place that, where we visit our stepdad's family, it's full of forest, pinewood forest, And, it was during late at night. I was with my little brothers and sisters, and we were all in this car. And, it was getting late. It was already about like 11:50 p.m. It was night, and, there's barely any light. And we start hearing these howls. And I think to myself, no problem, might be some coyotes, some animals, But then it turns out I don't know if you consider it Bigfoot because it had white fur, but I see a giant figure, furry, human-like figure with glowing red eyes. It had sort of like a whitish, grayish fur, right? And it got to me, and it was like right in front, right beside me, like right beside the car door, looking at me. And that thing was big, though. It got all the way like around my shoulders, and I'm 6'1", by the way. So yeah, that's my story to it. So I told my step grandma about it, and I told my step aunts about it, and they said that it's not the first time seeing something like that. And I keep thinking to myself, could there be a Bigfoot in Mexico, or sort of like a subspecies of Bigfoot?
That's extremely interesting. I have heard a few sightings from down in Mexico, but I'll be honest, you're one of the first that I've had reach out and share. So that is extremely cool that you were able to come up. Thank you, Jimbo. Were you able to get a good look at the face of what you saw, Jimbo?
Not really, because then again, it was dark and there wasn't like any light. I don't think it's normal seeing, a big, massive figure with red eyes looking at you.
No, definitely. That's definitely a rare thing. And you said it was white as well, right? White hair?
White, grayish fur.
Gotcha. Could you get a view as to the silhouette, how different parts of it looked like, even though it was dark?
Well, yeah, I mean, I did see the silhouette. Well, how do I say it? It had, the head, it was like, it was elongated. And it had very strong shoulders, a very strong, a very big, strong, figure. Sort of like most gorillas that you see, on TV.
Absolutely. Could you see the arms at all?
Well, I did see some of it. I think I have seen the hands. They were black. They're nasty.
Kind of just pretty or an actual dark color?
Like an actual dark color.
Okay. All right. Well, Jimbo, thank you for coming up and for sharing what you saw down there. Here at Bigfoot Society, our goal is to provide a platform for those that have encountered Bigfoot to share their encounter in a safe and respected environment. But we need to hear your story. If you've experienced something that you just can't explain, please send me an email at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Then we can start the conversation. And I know a lot of you have not shared your encounter at all. It's been 20 years, and it's time that you get this off your chest, and then you can get some well-deserved rest, because I know you haven't been sleeping. I understand what you're going through, and I appreciate every one of you listening.
Bigfoot Society Podcast, hosted by our captain, Jeremiah Byron, where it's all Bigfoot all the time. Have you ever had the urge to do more, to be more? Now you can by joining Bigfoot Society on the Patreon. Get ad-free episodes and even member-only episodes. Take part in movie night and even live video chats. Interact behind the scenes with Jeremiah and other Patreon members like me, Slaya. The powerful podcast goes on, and you may contribute a verse in our Patreon community. Carpe diem. Seize the day, Bigfooters, and make your lives extraordinary.
Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list. These are all in Oregon, by the way. Oak Ridge, Dexter, Fall Creek, Deschutes National Forest area, Cultus Lake, Spirit Lake, Subtle Lake, McKenzie River area, Sweet Home area, the area west of Crater Lake, east of 230 West Diamond Lake Highway, and north of 62 Crater Lake Highway. You can use email bigfootsociety@gmail.com. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.